The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation, founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
Hello, this is Morgan Halgren. For 16 seasons, Living in Iowa told the tale of what it means to be uniquely Iowan. Tonight, we honor that spirit by bringing you another glimpse into our rich heritage with a few stories from our archives. In this episode of The Best of Living in Iowa, we'll revisit our story on the history behind Templeton Rye, see how the telephone forever changed how Iowans communicate, and peer into the mind of Iowa artist Jamie Burmeister. When Scottish poet Robert Burns enthusiastically declared that freedom and whiskey went together, he could not possibly have foreseen a time when people would not be free to drink it. But so it was during the Prohibition and Depression years in America. One Iowa town found a way around the ban that kept its economy from going on the rocks.
January 16th, 1920. Prohibition became the law. The smart boys first saw big money in rum running and bootlegging. And then they realized there was even bigger money in manufacture and distribution. Now that it was illegal, the public got even thirstier. And everyone who paid for a drink gave the growth of crime a boost.
Hollywood has often used big city gangsters and the Prohibition era as a theme for many popular movies. But in reality, some of the finest hooch in the heartland was cooked up in the community of Templeton, Iowa.
Yeah, there's some good stuff and some damn poor stuff.
On the old drugstore up here on top, you get 50 cents, you get a pint of whiskey, you go over to the blacksmith shop, you could buy a pint for 50 cents. It was all over, you know, it was.
My dad, he, in 1929,
We got our menu.
my dad bought a new four-door Oldsmobile, and it took 1,100 gallons of Templeton Rye to buy it.
Located in southern Carroll County, Templeton was a German settlement incorporated in 1882. It was one of many townships platted after the trains came through. Predominantly Catholic by faith, the spire of the Sacred Heart Church could be seen for miles.
Oh, this is a picture of the old saloon days before Prohibition.
Lambert Schwaller, the nephew of two of Templeton's most well-known bootleggers, has lived here all his life.
Like 3 or 4 bartenders, and they sold whiskey legally. This picture shows my dad as a young man, as a bartender back here, and a bouncer. They had some pretty rough times when the railroads went through. And these guys...
The reality of how and why this home brew came to be made in Templeton was rooted in an economic necessity. Templeton, like the rest of the country, was suffering through the Great Depression.
I sold my 4-H pigs. I was on the farm then, sold pigs for 2 cents a pound. And I sold my herd sow. She weighed 700 pounds. I got $14 for her. And she was 3 years old. She ate that up in feed, you know. And people were desperate, you know.
Faced with financial ruin, a few of Templeton's enterprising citizens found economic survival in the form of a bootleg whiskey called Templeton Rye.
A lot of people had large families, and if you were the breadwinner and you came home and you found 8 or 10 kids at home that were hungry and you had nothing to feed them, why, that was pretty good motivation to start getting into the liquor business, as they called it.
Supplies for the bootlegging operations were easy enough to get. Every week, hundreds of pounds of sugar, cases of empty bottles, corks, casks, and barrels were delivered by the railroad that ran through town.
And it was sold legitimately through the stores because there was no law against selling sugar or yeast. But what happened to it after it left the store by midnight delivery was another story.
But it takes more than the right ingredients to make a great whiskey.
There were a lot of experts, though, because they all did about the same thing. They handled it well. It was a clean operation. They aged it well in charred kegs, and they sold it when it was ready. And it's about like any modern legal distiller now. They knew when whiskey was good, and that's when they sold it. And the total result was a good quality product that suddenly became in demand all over the country.
As demand for the whiskey increased, so did the number of people making it.
The town of Templeton has about, at that time, maybe 100, 110 homes. And probably 70% of them were involved. There are a few outstanding bootleggers who owned the equipment and would place it in people's corn cribs or hog barns or basements. And they would get paid off at the rate of 50 cents a gallon. And so if you ran 10 gallons a day, you'd get $5, and that's $5 more than they would have made anywhere else, because wages generally were probably $1 a day at the most. So it doesn't sound like big money now, but it was important money then.
Soon, a steady supply of this homemade Iowa hooch was making its way into nearby cities.
I used to go along with my brother. He was in the bootlegging business too, and he'd always go to Nebraska to look at hogs, and I don't know what for, but we always was loaded with something. But we'd always come back empty.
Although not directly involved in the Templeton Rye market, notorious Chicago gangster Al Capone is said to have been a buyer.
They would purchase a load of booze from Dad and bring in their semi and load in the middle of the night, and ordinarily they had 4 guards on all ends of the truck. Load up and leave just as quietly as they came in. And I don't think half the good citizens of Templeton knew they had been here. But they were there, believe me.
With a reputation for good whiskey and the publicity created by the temperance movement, the manufacturer of Templeton Rye was well known to the feds.
The day that my father and mother were raided at our house, they raided 2 other houses. And they would just show their search warrant. They'd move in. They would pour any ingredient like household lye or anything into the mash barrels and mark it poison. They would take the still outside and chop it full of holes. And after they had done all that, they have the evidence of whiskey, which they need in court. They would leave and go on to another house. I was a little worried, not that we were cooking whiskey, but what was going to happen after the raid happened. And as it turned out, everybody had to appear in federal court in Fort Dodge. And about the time my father had his shaving equipment and everything packed to go to jail, why somehow he was released from the responsibility. And I'm not sure how it happened, but it might have had something to do with 8 of us kids at home getting hungry, and probably thought it was cheaper to leave him work than to put him in jail.
By 1931, the Templeton Rye business was booming, and for Christmas that year, the town advertised its prosperous local industry.
And it hung right in the center of the garlands that typically went across Main Street at Christmas time. And this was flaunting Templeton Rye just a little bit more than people could handle. It might have been looked at as flaunting the fact that we were breaking the law, but I think it was just for fun, just give people a laugh. They, like, you know, we don't care. We make whiskey and everybody knows it.
After Prohibition was repealed in 1933, the Templeton Rye market eventually dried up. Today, its legacy lives on in the town's collective memory and at least one local tavern. But why wasn't the nationally known Templeton Rye ever turned into a legitimate business?
We never had good enough wells to produce enough water to run a distillery. And that is what I'm told was the reason they didn't put a still in here, or a distillery in here.
Rumor has it a few people still make the stuff, but most residents would rather talk about the old bootlegging days. And when they do, it's usually with a lot of forgiveness and a little bit of pride.
We didn't create the demand for alcohol and whiskey. It was there, and the government cut off the supply. And we didn't really feel like we were such lawless people. We were just taking opportunity of a way to hold our businesses together, our farms and our families.
Try to imagine Iowa in the 1870s. a patchwork of isolated communities just beginning to make connections through an amazing new invention, the telephone. At the Jefferson Telephone Company Museum, you can see just what it took to help these towns get it together.
Number, please. Thank you. When you think they might be done, there's no way of knowing. You'd go in. If no one was talking, you'd say, "Are you waiting? Are you through?" And if nobody answered, then you would go ahead. You'd pull the plugs and shut the jack.
During the early years of telephony, the operator became the central connection in a booming new industry. In addition to the Bell Telephone Company, Iowa once had over 1,000 independent phone companies. Independent telephone pioneer associations across the nation are striving to preserve their state's telephone histories by publishing books using stories from local independent companies. For 15 years, the Iowa chapter has gathered facts and memories in preparation for an Iowa collection. We'll combine portions of these histories with personal recollections to tell our version of Iowa's phone history. We begin at the Jefferson Telephone Company's museum as Gene Daubendick describes this version of the tin can on a string.
This is the pre-telephone instrument, and you could actually talk into that diaphragm and be heard and understood at the other end.
Clear Lake was introduced to the new mechanical wonder, the telephone, just 2 years after Alexander Graham Bell uttered his famous, "Mr. Watson, come here, I need you." Telephone fever struck Clear Lake in 1878 when the first lines were installed.
And many times doctors or lawyers visiting a distant city had seen a telephone and figured how they could use it in their business or between their business and their house. So many times, in some towns, the professional people first owned the switchboard companies in the town.
The telephone switchboard is been in the back of candy stores, in taverns, in general stores, in rooming houses, on the second floor, the back porch. With this project, of course, we hope to gather all of those stories and be able to put them in our book.
By about 1900, even before they had electricity, some farmers began to feel the need for a telephone. Each rural line was organized as a separate company with ownership, repair, and maintenance vested in the farmers who used the line. Interference and line noises were common, resulting in an occasional shouting match in order to be heard. Many of these small companies were started as cooperatives with 20 or so families on a party line.
We were expected to have high moral character. Besides, it was a very private. We never revealed anything that was said over the switchboard. We lived in the telephone office. We moved there with my mother in 1938. She was the night operator. I worked during day hours. We had sometimes 15 on the line, and if a certain number would ring, especially after 9 o'clock at night, all 15 would be on the line wondering what's going on.
The independent telephone pioneers took the old Harper Mutual Telephone Building to the Iowa State Fairgrounds. The night operator slept in a small bedroom, and callers were discouraged from calling after 10 p.m., except for emergencies. Considering today's sophisticated technology, it's hard to believe the simplicity of the early telephones.
Usually an ohm meter, a pair of pliers, and a screwdriver was all you needed. And as far as fixing phones, sometimes they thought it was a soft job because all they saw you is when you were sitting drinking coffee. If you were out working, they didn't see you. When you lost sleep, that's when it started to freeze and rain. If I could find some of those people that were telling me what a soft job I had, I'd just give them a whole day's wages if they'd go up and fix that.
Lead-covered telephone cables went underground in the early 1900s, but were later replaced by clay tile and steel wrapping to prevent gophers from disrupting phone service. Today, most telephone lines are underground. As rural companies connected with town, many Iowa communities were left with 2, 3, or more phone companies. As a result, subscribers sometimes needed more than one phone and occasionally had to make a long-distance call across Main Street. There were cooperatives, mutual companies, and many family-run operations like the Daubendicks, which represents 4 generations in the phone business. When they came to Jefferson in 1938, a 2-phone company town became one, when Gene's father and grandfather negotiated the purchase of the Bell Company and formed the Jefferson Telephone Company.
Back in the 30s, and my family was in the telephone business, they had exchanges in northwestern Iowa, and we took in lots of corn from farmers to apply on the telephone bill. The payphone, as crude as it might be, they've been around forever. My grandfather used to call them slot machines. And he said, boy, we get as many of those slot machines as we can, and we make money.
People would call in and say, I'm going to be at so-and-so's house, and we would make a note. We did a lot of call transferring that way. A line call was when the subscriber would notify the office that he had something to sell. A long ring on both sides, and we could hear the receivers going off hook. And when everything was quiet, then we would start telling about the 100 pounds of potatoes that were for sale, or something of this type.
In April 1946, the new dial equipment was purchased. Somehow, everyone learned to get along without the central girl.
In some parts of the state, the farmers got tired of operating the phone companies. Many times phone companies in rural Iowa were given away or sold for $1 to the new owners.
The two biggest things that have happened is, first of all, deregulation, and then the explosion of technology. We went through, it seems, solid state and electromechanical so quickly, and then into the digital technology and now the fiber optic technology. You have actually the latest in telephone technology in a lot of your small communities.
Consolidations and acquisitions of small companies brought the number of Iowa's independent phone companies to 154, which is still more than any other state in the nation.
It's fun to go back and fun to read some of the histories. The Iowans were not the people out in the sticks, but we're actually on the forefront of this communications thing.
Are you waiting? Are you through? Thank you.
Some artists use paint, pencils, and canvas to express themselves. Jamie Burmeister leans more to electrical cables, solar cells, and pliers. Jamie creates objects that interact with passers-by. Whether he asks them to ride an exercise bike or sit at a table, something unusual is sure to happen.
How are you today? You're looking big and strong this morning. I'm really proud of you. Are you drinking all of your water?
A smiling lady encourages plants to grow by television light.
You're getting greener and greener by the minute.
A little electronic solar cell-powered bug runs in circles. A pair of shoes magically taps to the beat of a makeshift metronome.
I'm so proud of you guys.
Jamie Burmeister's artwork is bound to make you smile. So we expected that Jamie might be something of a class clown. We were wrong. Jamie is more like a philosopher. He looks at his life deeply and hopes his art will bring out aspects of human consciousness for himself and his art audience as well.
I kind of look at making art as kind of being an explorer, maybe, or thinking of it as an exploration. I mean, I'm really interested in consciousness and how it's such a, it's a very familiar thing. It's like everyone's got it and everyone's got this consciousness, but yet it's really mysterious, and it's like the things that religions deal with and the things that, you know, science hasn't unraveled. So I think it's really interesting to sort of, you know, think about my awareness and experiences within the world. So I think that's where I start.
Jamie has an unusual background for an artist. He has college degrees in exercise science and health education, along with sculpture. To his way of thinking, art provides him with a focus for his wide-ranging explorations, and he invites others to join in.
If I was doing anything else, I'd never be able to tie them together. But with art, you know, I can, you know, weave it into something that might seem to make sense. I've done a number of other pieces with bicycles where a person has to sit down and ride a bike, and it does something. Or I'm more interested in maybe exploring things like on a technical side. So like a lot of my work is, I'm experimenting with video and electronics and mechanics.
Come on in, have a seat at the table.
And I'm a musician too, and some of the new pieces I'm working on now, almost everything I'm working on right now are having to do with sound and everyday objects playing music, I guess. So like this table piece, these table pieces I have over here, I was really interested in, the experience of eating. So you've got the one table with the two seats, and you sit at the one seat, and there's sort of this song that's played. And if someone sits on the other seat, there's a song that's played. But then when two people sit, it's a totally different song, and it's like really more enjoyable experience, usually, right, when you eat with two people. And so that's kind of how, that came apart. But, if I wasn't experimenting with the electronics, I never really would have been able to express it that way. I was thinking about these cups, and I wanted to do a piece with all these cups that we throw away all the time. For the longest time, I wanted to do a piece with these cups, and I couldn't come up with anything. But I began to wonder, if you were these cups, they hear these conversations, what would these cups say to each other? What'd you do at school today? Nothing, and that. So that's where that came from. I've got electronics. I've got a little microcontroller that controls some servo motors that control the straws to go up and down. I really like those ones that come real fast, like super simple idea, and seem to work fairly well. And that bug, when you really look at insects, are really amazing creatures. There are some people that would be really interested in like that's a solar cell, and how does that work, and how does that, and then some people maybe not, maybe they don't care about that, maybe they just care, that little thing goes around, it's this cute little bug that's, and that's good. I mean, I think if you get people that think anything about it, I mean, that's My grandfather passed away a couple years ago, and my aunt was there, and she was giving away all his clothing. So I took these shoes, and I had really fond memories of these shoes. They were like his dress-up shoes, so every time you go over there, and he would be happy, and he would, he'd kind of tap his feet and jump them up and down. And so I have these really fond memories of these shoes tapping. I mean, and it seemed obvious I was going to take these shoes and make them tap. It was really hard to get that to work, too. I didn't want it on a box. It would have been easy to put these shoes on a box and have something pushing it up and down. I really, for some reason, wanted them on the floor, as if, it was another one of those quick ideas. I had the idea, I had it all planned out how I wanted it in about 15 minutes, but then it took another 6 months to get the technical part to work out. Growing up in Iowa has really influenced the way I work, in that there's a certain work ethic that goes along with growing up on the farm. When something broke, you had to fix it yourself, and you often had to use whatever was around. And then I think that gives you sort of a, or at least myself, sort of a self-confidence. I've always felt, the ability that if I chose to do something, I could do it. So I think those are the ways that, growing up here in Iowa and on the farm has been a big help to making art.
The Best of Living in Iowa is funded in part by the Gilchrist Foundation, founded by Jocelyn Gilchrist, furthering the philanthropic interests of the Gilchrist family in wildlife and conservation, the arts and public broadcasting, and disaster relief.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.